This is a long, soothing bedtime retelling inspired by Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, shaped into a calm, immersive narrative perfect for drifting toward sleep. Imagine you are sitting on a wide, warm shore where the Nile meets the sea, the sky a soft velvet darkening to indigo. Gentle waves breathe in and out, a steady rhythm like a slow, contented heartbeat. Let the world slow down around you as I tell a tale of grand lives and gentle endings, of love that glowed fierce and soft at once, and of choices that moved like tides. In a time when empires were like great trees planted across the earth, their branches shading cities and their roots drinking deep from rivers of gold, there lived two great souls whose paths had crossed with a force that bent the stars a little. One of them was named Antony, a warrior who had trod many battlefields. He was broad of shoulder and quick of mind, a man who had led thousands with a voice that could call the wind to attention. He had the kind of courage that looked other men in the eye and said, "We will try, we will hold, we will endure." He carried within him the comfort of a soldier and the restlessness of a heart that had known too many triumphs to be satisfied with stillness. The other was Cleopatra, a woman who moved through her world like a warm, fragrant breath. She was the queen of a country where the river sang to the sun, where papyrus swayed and great boats floated like slow moons upon the water. Cleopatra was clever and enchanting, not merely by beauty, but by the way she thought and felt. Her mind was quick, her humor bright, and her loyalties unmistakable. Where others might have been content to be admired, she wanted to be known. She wanted to be loved. They found each other like two stars leaning close across a night. When they were together, the world tilted softly and colors deepened. For Antony, Cleopatra was a place that calmed him, an anchor he could visit in the quiet between storms. For Cleopatra, Antony was a flame that warmed her, an adventure that stirred the waters around her palace. They met in a moment of brightness and shared many small and large things. Laughter in long boats lit by oil lamps, conversations that stretched into morning like the slow song of a lark, evenings where music rose and settled like warm petals around them. Their love was not simple. It was rich with many layers, political, passionate, joyful, solemn. It breathed like the wind across the reed beds, now gentle, now strong. But life is a sea with many currents, and even the closest companions must answer other calls. From far away came the city of Rome, a place of stone and law, of strategies and ceremonies. There were other leaders there, steady and alert, sweeping their hands across maps of land and fleet. One of them was Caesar, a man who measured his days by the expansion of his reach and who believed in the order of things. He respected strength and expected duty. Between Caesar and Antony, and the interests of nations and people, there were tensions like low thunder on a far horizon. Winds shifted, seasons turned, new choices pressed against the gentle rhythm of days. At times, Antony thought he could live in two worlds, the fierce, ordered world of Rome and the soft, scented world of Egypt. He tried to carry both in his arms, but the weight was heavy. The men around him, his friends and officers, watched him with affection, and some worry, like people watching a favorite tree while a storm approaches. Some told tales in the quiet corners of taverns and tents, and such tales traveled like paper boats on the current. Boundaries blurred. Decisions made in the cold light of dawn looked very different beneath the warm lamps of evening. Cleopatra sensed the changes like one who reads the sky. She felt the slow drift of attention, the way that power, even when shared, seemed to ripple greedily. But she was not afraid. She met every wave with a cleverness that had been her guide since childhood. She wrapped herself in the comforts of her palace and drew the people she loved close. Her attendants, a small circle of friends who attended her with deep, devoted care. Together they walked through gardens where oranges sighed sweet scents into the dusk, and they paused to listen to music that rose like a warm tide. There was always a soft kindness to her gatherings, and laughter often spilled like wine. Even as grand events moved beyond the palace walls, private moments remained. Whispered conversations over maps, the quiet of hands clasping in the night, the taste of figs eaten slowly by a lantern. In those soft hours, Antony and Cleopatra were not leaders of vast armies or the makers of decisions that reshaped regions. In those hours, they were just two people, their hearts beating like the tide against the sand. But the world keeps moving, and so it was that messages came from across seas, bringing news of change and challenge. Letters and envoys, some bearing hope, others bearing caution, arrived at all hours. Antony listened carefully. He sat with his friends under starry skies and spoke with a steadiness that sometimes surprised those who knew him best. He felt the pull of his responsibilities. He loved the quiet confidence of leadership, the way a plan could gather and solidify, how soldiers found comfort in the certainty of a voice they could trust. And yet, he loved Cleopatra's country, the softness of the Nile at dawn, the way sunlight touched the marble in the palace, the scent of spices, and the hush of night gatherings. He tried to keep the two as neighbors within his heart, and for a while, he did. The seasons turned once more. The world made new alignments. A meeting was arranged, a union of sorts between families and cities, a marriage that might join the threads that seemed fraying. It was a practical thing, meant to bridge tension, to weave together the hopes of many into a calmer, steadier fabric. Octavia, a gentle woman of noble temperament, was sent to join Antony, a person whose patient kindness might soothe rougher seas. Her arrival was like the soft light of sober midday, kind, calm, and steady. Antony received her with honor and respect. He was careful as one who tends a fragile lamp, not harshly puffing at the wick, but placing it within safe arms so it might burn without sputtering. Yet even amid these practical efforts, the private current that bound Antony to Cleopatra did not vanish. A love that had once felt like a fire remained more like a glowing ember, warm, deep, not always the bright flame of early days, but steady and very real. Cleopatra, when she thought of Octavia, did not grow jealous in the way stories often narrate. She felt instead a complicated tenderness, a sadness softened by the knowledge that hearts can hold many things, and that life often requires sharing. She dressed with care, prepared her palace for visitors, and moved through her day with the kind of dignity that made enemies pause and friends sigh. Her expression, at times, was thoughtful. She watched the horizon. She saw the world as a pattern of decisions and longings. As storms gathered in the greater world, small moments among the two lovers grew richer with meaning. One evening, they sat upon a quiet balcony as the sky turned from rose to indigo and finches settled in the branches. A breeze brushed past, carrying with it a scent of jasmine. They spoke softly about old times, about the strange beauty of being able to stand at the center of so many histories. Antony told gentle tales of distant battles, not to boast, but to remind the heart of memory. Cleopatra, with a slight smile, told him of the river's moods, of how it sometimes glowed like metal under the moon. They held hands and let words rest. For a moment, the world was all hush and warmth. There were nights when the two would gather friends and officers, and they would dine by lantern light beneath a canopy of palms. Musicians would play, and laughter would roll like small waves. Even in times of worry, they created these soft spaces, as if to remind themselves that life still held beauty. They were generous in their hospitality. Food was served in bowls polished to a glow. Wine was poured into clay cups that steamed in the cool evening air. Stories were told of clever victories and narrow escapes, and there was much good-natured teasing. Those who were close to them, loyal soldiers, trusted companions, felt the grace of the evenings and were warmed by the steady presence of their hosts. Yet decisions must be made, and across the sea, the other leaders were preparing. Plans and strategies were set down where the maps were thick with ink. Fleets were gathered, horses readied, soldiers warmed in the early light. Each side watched the other cautiously, measuring with the patience of courtiers who know that a rash move can bring storms. Raiments of power were tried on like heavy cloaks, and soon enough the music of preparation grew like a tide swelling. Men that had once looked to one chief now felt pulled by another. As if loose threads in a great tapestry were being tugged by different hands. When the day of reckoning came, the fighting was not the thunderous chaos of a mindless storm, but rather a precise, somber choreography, men on both sides stepping into their parts, as if acting out a long-practiced play. The sea looked glassy, as if it resisted the heat of war, and yet ships moved like dark birds, setting off into the sky. There were moments of fierce courage, quiet tenderness, and brave endings. Antony, who had once fought with brilliant gusto, showed the measure of a leader who understood the weight of war. He moved among his men, offering quiet words of encouragement, steadying thoughts, a touch here and there that said, "I am with you." Cleopatra watched from the shore, her face drawn with tender concern. She saw Antony in the colors of battle, sudden as a sunburst, steady as a tide, and her heart hummed with both fear and fierce admiration. The sea returns what it takes. It is both gentle and stern. She recognized that in every sailor's face and every set jaw. When by dawn the first swell of conflict broke and the world seemed quieter, Antony returned to her side. He was wearied but intact. For a while they could sit together and let the day wane into the soft hush of evening. But fate is braided with many strands. Chance, miscommunication, shifting loyalties, these are threads that tug and fray. In time, rumors began to spread like quicksilver through Roman streets and into whispering camps. Some tales were kind, others sharp and bitter. Caesar's name rose in the councils as a man whose steadiness suited the demands of empire, and he found new allies and renewed favor among those who valued the rule of law and the quiet order of cities. As fortunes turned, Antony found himself pulled like someone caught between two tides, one tugging toward the order of Rome and the other toward the warmth of Egypt. It was in these shadows that the small luminous things became most important: the clasp of a hand at night, the careful arrangement of a table of figs and pomegranates shared in silence. Cleopatra, wise and graceful, felt storms approaching and chose not only to wait, but also to act with the craft of a woman who understood the language of people. She prepared her household not in panic, but with a calmness that was like folded silk. The maids and attendants moved with gentle efficiency, their steps the tick of a careful clock. They set lamps in the halls and candles along the walkways. In the palace, the dogs lay down, and the servants whispered like wind in the reeds. All of this was done quietly. Nothing was loud. Even the smallest things, how the wine was chilled, the way a lute was strummed in a corner, were tended to with affection. And Antony, for all the weight he carried, took refuge in the small acts of tenderness. He liked to sit and listen to the stories of his men, to know how each had wound up at his camp. He liked the clink of silver at a table and the warmth of a hand on his arm. He dreamed of the day when, if peace could be found, he might put down his sword and stay for longer than a while among the palm trees and warm air. Yet destiny has a way of asking for what it will. One dawn, the letters came with news of movement. More ships were mustering, more banners were being readied. Caesar's forces, steady and solemn, were preparing for a final meeting. The air seemed a touch colder, as if the world itself drew breath. Antony, in his noble resolve, prepared to do what leaders must do. He gathered his friends and officers. Their faces were lit by the steady light of torches and resolve. They exchanged looks that said more than any language. If fate decrees a certain path, we will walk it with honor. The battle that was to come is best remembered not by the clash of arms alone, but by the way people behaved in the hour of choosing. Antony rode where he must. Caesar, with that careful air of law and permanence, matched the tempo. Their forces met like slow waves folding together, neither mindless nor hungry for destruction, but full of the sober dignity of people who everywhere know the cost of war. And in the folds of the battlefield, tiny lives kept their ordinary rhythms, men breathed. A child in a camp slept. The smell of stew rose from a kettle. It was a tableau of ordinary life pressed into an extraordinary moment. After the clash, there came a stillness that felt like the long beat between heartbeats. In the quiet that followed, the truth lay in the open. Choices had been made, positions had shifted. Caesar stood with the gravity of a man who would rebuild and shape. Anthony felt the ache of weathered bravery and the loss of plans once so certain. He came home to Cleopatra, not in triumph, but with a gentleness that was like rain on a dusty path. They met with hands that trembled slightly, but held each other without blame. In truth and tenderness, there is shelter. Cleopatra, who had conceived of both judgment and tenderness, met Antony with eyes that had 1,000 things in them: questions, memories, and above all, care. They spoke simply, in a voice that was small and clear. They spoke of decisions and of their children, of things that mattered and things that could be healed. For a time, they were two people making sense of a world that had shifted beneath them. They told each other stories of their childhoods, faint recollections of gardens, and the taste of first figs, of a river's smell at dawn. The night around them seemed to soften, but history continued its steady path. Caesar, mindful and methodical, made plans. With him, Octavia lived in the ordered rhythms of Rome. Octavia herself was not a woman of loud feeling, but of patience. She moved through the world with a gentle dignity and a deep loyalty that was like a river running under ice, mostly calm, but strong all the same. She loved her family and wished peace for everyone. She was not heartless. She was simply one who understood that sometimes a quieter steadfastness can hold things together where more force would only tear them apart. Time passed. There were invitations and ceremonies. There were journeys across water where the stars made a ribbon overhead. Cleopatra sometimes walked in the garden alone as the moon lifted like a pale lantern, and she rehearsed her thoughts quietly, like a musician tuning an instrument for a gentle song. She would sit by the Nile and watch small fish dart in quick, bright flashes. She was thinking always about the future, about children, about what legacy she might leave. She wanted to give more than a memory. She wanted to leave warmth and steadiness where she could. In time, the final shape of events took hold. Antony's strength slackened not through lack of courage, but through the bond of complicated loyalties and the exhaustion of holding too many things at once. The man who had once ridden fearless into battle felt his mind twist like old rope, fraying under the pull of tides too strong. He found himself making choices that bent toward what the heart yearned for, even when the world called for a different measure. And so the gentle people who loved him watched with quiet sorrow as his energy dispersed in so many directions. Cleopatra, always elegant and resourceful, moved with both dignity and a deliberate softness. She had always known how to hold an audience, how to turn brightness into shelter. When the final days approached, she did not panic. She arranged small and tender things. She set a table with fruit and bread. She brushed out hair until it shone like the surface of a calm bay, and she gathered the women she loved close. She had learned to measure every moment by its warmth. The palace lamps were lit with a careful hand, not in a display, but as an offering to what mattered most: comfort, compassion, memory. One evening, as twilight leaned slowly into night, a quiet messenger arrived with news that cut the air like a little bell. Antony had given himself to grief and to defeat in ways that no armor could keep him from. His friends gathered around him like a soft curtain, but some doors could not be shut. The weight of choices pulled him into a still, strange place. There was sorrow, and in sorrow there is a kind of holiness. The women of Cleopatra's household tended to the practical and the tender, lighting candles and arranging cushions. They spoke quietly as they worked, words soft as threads in a tapestry. When the end came, it arrived with a solemn hush. People met under the cool light of morning and under the closer, gentler veils of dusk. Cleopatra stood in the palace like a woman who had made an entire life into a small, beautiful vessel. She took breaths as though counting them, as though they were beads on a chain. It was not a fury of drama so much as a steady acceptance. She loved Antony with a devotion that was a kind of shelter. In the moment they said goodbye, there was no loud lamentation. There was only the simple offering of care. After Antony's passing, a soft hush took the palace. The world around it continued with its rhythms, but inside there was a stillness like a lamp with a steady flame. Cleopatra gathered her attendants and made plans not in rage or fear, but with the steady mind of someone intent on preserving what she could. She would not be a prize paraded in a show. Her dignity, firm as a stone, guided every decision. When she spoke to envoys, it was with a calm voice that bore the authority of someone who knew both her value and the worth of peace. Caesar, who had watched the world tilt and settle, moved with the tenderness one might reserve for a delicate bloom. He did not seek to break the life that remained, rather, he offered comfort and compassion. He would not insult the grief of those who mourned. He spoke gently with those who had followed Antony, promising to honor what had been given and also to make plans that might keep the fragile peace. In a world so full of noise, his quiet steadiness felt like a hand on the the shoulder. It did not take away sorrow, but it kept the body from stumbling. Cleopatra, in her final decisions, moved like a woman making a last act of care. Her attendants prepared the room where she would rest and placed with tenderness the small tokens that meant most. A ribbon from her early days, a bowl of figs, the sound of a stringed instrument that seemed to know the temperature of night. She wrapped herself in soft robes, not as a proclamation, but as a statement of comfort, a way to be gentle with herself as she stepped into what would come next. When the moment arrived, it felt less like a scene from a distant play and more like the quiet closing of a long, beloved book. It was peaceful and precise, like watching a bird fold its wings before sleep. Cleopatra lay back and looked once more at the ceiling where soft lantern light painted slow, golden circles. She remembered Antony, his laugh, the warmth of his hand, the battles they had faced together, and the quiet afternoons when the river had seemed to shimmer just for them. She remembered also her people, her children, the gardens and the music, the gentle arms of her companions. All of these were stitched into the cloth of her life. For those who were near, this last scene was full of soft grief and deep, abiding love. The women who had stood with her through everything held her close. There were no harsh cries or violent gestures, only the hush of remembrance and the careful placing of hands. She breathed steadily for a while, and then, with a peaceful smallness, she slipped away, as if the world had arranged a private, tender farewell. Those who witnessed it felt the immense sweep of things, an ending that included courage and gentleness in equal measure. There was sorrow, yes, but also a hush of understanding. People who had once stood opposed found themselves quiet and thoughtful. Caesar, for all his authority, felt the weight of the moment and acted with the grace of a man who had seen the effects of the human heart in all its bravery and frailty. After the hush came gestures of remembrance. There were soft processions where people walked in measured steps and placed flowers and small offerings. There were words of kindness spoken about lives well lived. People toasted quietly to both victory and loss, recognizing that both can hold sorrow and honor together. The river kept on flowing. The harvests would come in their time, and small children would still chase bright moths across the courtyards. Life, in its gentle insistence, returned to its rhythm, and so our story settles softly, like a pillow easing under a tired head. There are no grand proclamations here, rather, there is the gentle knowledge that great lives often meet great endings, the way warm oceans meet the shore quietly, with a slow, inevitable grace. We remember Antony not only as a conqueror, but as a man who loved and led with a depth of feeling. We remember Cleopatra as a woman of luminous intelligence and devotion, a queen who knew how to turn power into tenderness. If you like, imagine that tonight you are walking beside that Nile, under a velvet sky sprinkled with stars. Somewhere, soft music plays far away. You can hear small waves lapping the shore and a distant murmur of voices. You smell jasmine and old wood and a cup of warm, sweet tea. You sit down on the sand and let the quiet settle around you. Picture the palms swaying with the breath of night, and let your own heart slow to the rhythm of the tide. There is a deep kindness in endings, the kind that gathers memories like smooth stones and lays them gently in the hands. In the hush after great events, people find time again to mind the small things, the names and tastes, and quiet jokes that make life rich. You too have your own gentle stories tucked inside your chest. Small acts of courage, nights of laughter, fingers intertwined. These are treasures, delicate and warm. As you listen, take a slow breath in. Hold it a second. Then let it go as if you are placing a bright bead on a string made of moonlight. Breathe in again, deeper yet. Hold, breathe out, and feel the shoulders relax. Let your feet sink into the imagined sand, warm and safe beneath you. Know that all the people in our story, Antony, Cleopatra, their friends and companions, found, in the end, a soft and steady peace. The world's great tides moved on, and with them, so did the lives of many quiet people who went back to their gardens and hearths. Tonight, in the small hours, you may droop your lids and enter a gentle sleep. The river of your own dreaming will move as the Nile did, soft, nourishing, carrying you forward through quiet, pleasant places. Dream of lanterns hovering over still water, of warm figs and soft laughter, and of hands held steady in the night. If ever your heart feels heavy, remember the calm strength that comes from knowing that endings come with a kind of mercy. They make room for new mornings and new little currents of joy. In the hush of this close, take another slow, easy breath. Let your thoughts slide like small boats drifting. You might find yourself smiling or simply resting with the comfort of a warm blanket around your shoulders. The world is steady, you are safe. The stars watch over the wide water, patient and bright, and morning will come with gentle promise. Sleep now, and let the river of dreams carry you where soft shores and kind company wait. Good night.